Welcome. Your question. So we are on YouTube, probably towards the end. We'll do introductions unless you want to do a public introduction. We just want to share this. So right now we're live. So you're more than welcome to share. But like I said, we can do introductions at the end. So we got in the room. Doesn't matter. Up to you. But that's why we're all mic'd up here. I was like, who's? Let's see. My mic. Does it sound good? Yeah. Oh. Yeah, I think so. You have one more mic somewhere? That's so strange. Is it? No, it's like it's coming. It's like coming from a completely different. Huh? Yeah, but where? Because it's coming through the mic. Like it's coming through this. No, I still hear it. Yeah, I still hear it. Okay. All right. Well, we will get started. I don't see anything.
Yes. Because it seems like when I said we're about to get started, but then I don't hear anything. So, oh, it's a lag on the YouTube. I did. I did. Okay. Thank you. Okay. 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 I don't have mine on. I don't know how to turn mine on. Okay. You got. Okay. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Okay. Now we're going to get started. Thanks everybody for your patience. I was like, oh no, we're being haunted. Okay. All right. Now we're ready. Excellent. Thank you all for your patience. Thought I found money in our couch just now. Did not. All right. Welcome. I got all the things. Hope nobody else. I'm going to turn my phone off here as a do not disturb. Okay. Here we go. So want to welcome you to the Avery Research Center for African American History and Culture. I'm going to put that there so my hair doesn't get in the way. We want to welcome you to our discussion. We are very excited that to be a part of College Reads this year, live and in full effect. So this year's selection is How the Word is Passed by Clint Smith, who will be joining us here at the college on October 24th at 7 o'clock p.m. So we hope that you will come back and join us. It is a free event, no registration required, no tickets required. It's just come in and grab a seat at the Satilli Theater. So before we get started, I am Dr. Tamara Butler, Executive Director of the Avery Research Center for African American History and Culture. And I'm here with.
I am Patricia Washington. I am a sophomore undergraduate assistant here at the Avery, and I'm an accounting major at the College of Charleston.
Yay, we're so excited. So Patricia took me up on a challenge. I was like, hey, you want to read this? You want to read this book? And it's also important because Patricia is a sophomore. And so this book was actually required mostly of freshmen, first year students. And so we really wanted to also open up the space for students, community members, faculty, all to just join us and think through the text. And so what we may do is because we're live streaming, I'm going to repeat the question out and then kind of join in the conversation as well. So, but we want everyone to participate. We may pass around this wireless mic if I could bother our lovely manager of archival services, Aisha Heikel, if I could bother her to pass the mic around as we discuss today. So, if possible, I hand this to you. I think it's on. No, I don't know. We're going to find out. All right. So we actually want to start off the conversation. The questions have been developed by Patricia and I. And so we want to start off the conversation with if you're willing and able to introduce yourself and choose any of the following questions. So if you haven't read the book, that's completely fine. But if you are joining us and you would like to think about like, well, why would I pick this book? Why do I want to read it? And so our questions are, we're asking you to introduce yourself by providing your name, affiliation, location. What did you find to be compelling in the book? Why did you choose to read this book? How has the book challenged or aligned with your teachings and beliefs? And then, or tell us about your reading process. So if you found the book to be challenging at any point, did you pause? Did you stop? Did you put it down for a couple of weeks and come back to it? But yes, we just want to know a little bit about who's in the room with us, if possible. I was like, you do take care of Patricia. Yep. Yes. I'm gonna borrow your mic. Our audience on YouTube said they can't hear you. So we want to make sure everybody can hear you. There we go.
So that was,
Nope, just kidding. There we go.
that was my, did I get anything, did I know anything about slavery in New York? No. Was I active with students with Rat Brown when he was on Howard's campus when I was there? No. Because who was the students who was out there? But those of us from Pennsylvania up, no, we weren't looking at that. And I feel like I missed so much from not being involved. What I was involved with in New York was the Council of Negroes and Jews, with the Red Cross, with other volunteer organizations. I even got a monetary donation from the Daughters of the American Revolution. They did that. But more compelling in this book was the Whitney, the chapter that I had probably listened to twice.
Try one more time.
Testing, testing. 1,
Hit
2,
the-
3. 1.
Give us a minute. We just want to make sure.
Testing.
Nope, it's fine. I'll just give this mic away. We'll use my mic because that one's, we're not going to fight with that one. All right. So anyone else wanted to add? I'm going to pass around the wireless mic. So
Test, test.
Thank
Hello,
Okay,
hello. Hello, hello.
now it's working. This one works, right? My name is Lee Kamen, and my affiliation, I guess, is loose. I volunteer increasingly more and more for the new International African American Museum, and so that's been my entree to some degree to the Avery Center. But the African American Museum did a webinar, and I forget exactly the context of it, sometime early summer, late spring, and Clint Smith was on the webinar. And it wasn't just to talk about his book, but it was part of the whole discussion. So that was my introduction to him. And I was so impressed by him, just how articulate, intelligent, insightful, et cetera, that I wanted to get his book. So I checked his book out and I read it over the summer. For me, I have something similar. I've spent most of my life in Minnesota, and I've been in Charleston now for a while. I considered myself highly educated. I had AP history in high school. I actually have a bachelor's of arts degree in history. I was pre-med and I went and practiced medicine for 35 years, but I always really enjoyed history, partly which got me to Charleston because I wanted to sort of get back involved with history. And one of the things that I still can't get over is thinking I was really well educated and realizing how much I did not learn until I came to Charleston, and particularly African American history, which I really consider American history, but it gets sometimes broken off as African, but it's really American history. And that was what was so disappointing to me, is here I took all these classes and really learned very, very little about anything about slavery, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, et cetera, you know, and even the civil rights movement. Is I was old enough to know what was going on, but not really appreciate it till I came to Charleston. So this book is just one of a number that I have subsequently read in the last couple of years that has been just really helpful for me to get much more insightful and understanding. I mean, there's so much about this book that I found compelling. I think the most, some things like I didn't know much about the Whitney plantation. I did not know about. I did not really understand Angola prison. I mean, I knew about Angola prison, but I did not really understand the details of that place. But I think maybe the most obvious thing was this dichotomy between, I'll just say it, what white Americans think of Thomas Jefferson, and then the reality of Thomas Jefferson, or at least the other part of his life that we did not learn. And that contrast to me was really, really impressive and amazing. Most of these books, it's fun for me because I feel I'm back in college again. So most of these books I actually read and I take notes. My notes on this book, unfortunately, I left in Minnesota when I was back there this summer and I read it, so I don't have them with me, which I'm annoyed with. But I now read these books and I take notes, and because there's so much in them that I know I'm not going to remember it unless I actually have my notes. So I wish I had my notes with me today, but I don't. All right, I'll stop.
we're going to take one more from the audience, and then turn it over back to Patricia.
I will be honest, I haven't read the whole book. I am interested in reading it because I appreciate the words of a poet, right? And Butler knows this. Can I claim you as my affiliation? I'm also CFC alum, and also have been taught the one version of history that we have gotten from public education, and that is not full. Like, we know there are these big holes and gaps, and I've been fortunate enough growing up in this place to hear the other stories a little bit, and I think that's why, especially from a poet, a book that really just admits, that slavery is central piece of our history that we have to just admit face on in order to to really understand ourselves and each other. And so I think all of this conversation is very important. I think that, he's definitely making commentary that everyone can benefit from, and hear the full history of this place that we're all in.
Thank you.
So with this book, for many of those who have, well, if you've read it or haven't read it, but I think this is more of a question for those who have read it. How has this book challenged or aligned with your teachings and beliefs? Anyone?
I know I may come back and get my mic, but go ahead.
I'll bring it to you.
That's fine. If you want to switch, do you want to switch?
Yes.
Okay, let's switch. Doing this impromptu, so
Uh-huh.
it's do what you can Wednesday.
It's a dance.
There you go.
All right. Thank you. I read this book when it came out because it's germane to my work. I work in public history at McLeod Plantation Historic Site. At first, I was a little offended that he didn't include McLeod in the book, but that's okay. Yes, it aligns with my beliefs completely. One of the things that I think is compelling about this book is that it exists.
Mhm.
It is long overdue. I enjoyed reading more about the Whitney. I needed more details about the Whitney. They are the #1 plantation historic site in America for the interpretation of slavery. And that's according to a book called Remembering Enslavement, which is written by a bunch of scholars who interviewed everybody at more than 230 plantation historic sites in America. Whitney's #1. You want to guess what's #2?
Is it McLeod?
It's McLeod.
What?
Yeah.
Woo-woo.
So
Air horns.
it's really important to what I do every day.
And that's one of our favorite folks, Paul. If you haven't visited Paul out at McLeod, please do. Anyone else want to tackle that question of if the book aligns or challenges something that we believe in or teachings? I do want to build. Oh, go ahead. Did you want to say?
Well, I would say as an archivist, definitely it aligns on our education and mission here at Avery. It's something we do every day. We live it. And so I think it was great that we have a discussion here today because that's what we talk about the Whitney Plantation and how they had the interpretation and the tour, no script. So we do, we have a script here. We educate our tour, our students to get their own story and their own lens. And they go through Avery's different histories that we have. And then even looking at the Thomas Jefferson's plantation, reinterpreting that space so that other stories are told of the oppressed people or the people that are enslaved histories are at the forefront. That is, really get line right to our mission here at Avery. So.
Thank you. And speaking of which, we are a great resource for learning about how to tell histories, how to, where to dig through it. I think I'm going to do a little platform, a little soapbox here, and think about African American history. One thing that this book demonstrates, even though it's not a lot, not some, it may be in or outside of academia. I'm not quite sure. It depends on how you choose to interpret it. But the thing I love about it is it shows the rigor of African American history and how do we uncover it. So the fact that it's public historians at all different variations along that gradient, that they're engaging it. So it's everything. So the kind of work that is needed to make sense of and put together. Jessica Marie Johnson uses the word assemblages to talk about Whitney specifically, and this assemblages of Blackness and history. But I'm really drawn to this idea of oral history, DNA testing, trying to find other research, other primary sources, archaeological digs, like putting all of these pieces together in hopes of at the minimum piecing together a person. And then after that, piecing together the story that that person sits within, right? And how they created that story. So I think that's the other part, is that so often as we look at our political landscape and educational landscape, I don't really know if people think of history, but specifically African-American history and studies, as this very rigorous endeavor, right? That in order to tell the stories of who we are and where we've come from, it's a lot of like following a trail and then something falls off. And then you hopefully will pick it up on the other end. But it requires people to look at the story from all different perspectives, and using all different kinds of tools and techniques. And so I wonder what kind of world we would be in. And throw this out, what kind of world would we be in if we actually encourage students and learners to think of history as kind of lifelong, rigorous endeavor rather than kind of like a side, it's not the main course. It's an elective, it's the side thing that people do. So why do you think that is? Go ahead.
I have a granddaughter that's a freshman here. And why was this book not a required for freshmen? I have read other College of Charleston Reed books. Why? I mean, did the college not want to have the conversation? It can be uncomfortable. I recognize that, but we're supposed to have learners here. I asked my daughter, who's a CFC graduate, why, if her daughter was reading this book. I said, now it's optional. They don't have to do it. She said, oh, she's not going to read it. She said she's not going to read it because it's not a required reading. She has other books that are required for classes.
Mm-hmm.
So then I got in touch with her and she says, no, I'm not going to read it.
That's interesting. So do you know why? You want to jump in?
I just feel like as a student at the College of Charleston, I asked Dr. Butler, is this book required? He was like, it's required for the freshman or it's not?
It's not.
Like, oh, well, at first I wasn't going to read it, but I was like, okay, I want to take you up on this challenge. I want to read it myself. And I like what you said, that, why isn't it required? I actually enjoyed the book, and I feel like the college could have more a conversation centered around not just the book, but the topic overall.
Yeah. So there's a phasing, the College Reads program is going through some transition. And so they're just trying to figure out, should we make College Reads mandatory, which is what it has been in the past. And it's an odd time because the book is, the topic itself is like, it comes off as like, oh wait, the college is trying to make this curve around slavery, but it's like, this is actually the year that it was like, we're gonna try this non-mandatory, will students opt into College Reads? But we'll see. We'll see what happens. Yes, Paul.
What's the percentage of white students at the College of Charleston?
What a great question. That number I do not know, but I can tell you it's going to probably be well over 80%.
It's been some years since I heard that the Black student population was about 6%, and I've heard that it's dropped.
Mhm.
I wonder why they didn't have to read this book.
There's a lot of questions. I mean, I think the one thing I also will encourage us to think about is as you think about your own curriculum, because that was one of the other things, is like, what have you learned that sets up history, for example, as a, like, do we think of history as a career path? And if not, why not? What do you think what would be most of you are here for a lot of different reasons, but why do we think that history might not be a career path, which in this book it specifically demonstrates the kinds of career paths that people took. You know, people went from bartending to tour guiding, right? Like in historical interpretation. But why do you think that might be?
So, good afternoon,
Hi.
evening, whatever time it is. My name is Tiffany Harris, and I am a new faculty member here at the College of Charleston in the School of Education. Full disclosure, I did not read the book. That's why I'm sitting back here and minding my business. But when you bring up history, I'm like, I can't help. So I am from Atlanta, Georgia. I majored in history in undergrad. I have always loved history since I was a little kid. The stories between past and present, it was my thing. And exactly what you're saying, when I got to college, I was more or less kind of told, like, well, what are you going to do with that? What are you going to do with a history degree? Telling me that I had to go to graduate school, which I did, but not in history. And even in history, programs they're very elitist, purist. So they want people who have studied strictly history in a traditional way. So just like Dr. Butler is suggesting, not seeing African American studies and then other ethnic and cultural studies as rigorous or as important. I ain't read the book, but as far as curriculum, my class came here, what was that, like 2-3 weeks ago? to Avery. I teach foundations of education. I think the curriculum that I inherited is whack. And I was like, I'm not doing that. But also we have this lovely resource here, this living archive here that the majority of people on campus don't seem to really care about. But that's on them, that's their business. I brought my students here, they were phenomenal. And yeah, we need to just utilize the resources that are around us. We need to tap into local histories and public memory. Like I said, I'm from Atlanta, so my own research looks at kind of like using my childhood memories to kind of create a different map of Atlanta than what we may see as official. So I'm certain you all know about Atlanta, and part of that is because of world's busiest airport ranking, also the 1996 Olympics. But that world's busiest airport knocked down one of my childhood homes. So I got a beef with that airport. And part of my research is going to the airport and like a reclamation of sorts, like hearing what people say about that airport, using rap music and Black women's lived experiences to create a map of what are the places that are important in Atlanta. You're not going to get that on those official maps. And to look at hauntings, or like you mentioned earlier, the silences and exclusions.
Thank you. New ed faculty.
I subsequently was asked to med students to general thank you for the medical student. But I strongly encourage them liberal arts majors, but really just push it because I found through even my career in medicine, there was something about having that knowledge that good some of their history, where they might have come themselves. And I think there's no question it's a great career pathway because we need people who are willing to teach us to how to evaluate history and all that. So it's a great career pathway. But it's also just a great base of knowledge. There's a time that a very simplistic but we don't ever learn the lesson. You know, just start right back up again. That will area of study.
I'm going to toss this question to our student here and just ask the question of, you know, what do you feel? So you're an accountant major, right? Accounting major. Why are you here at Avery? Or what have you learned in being here at Avery?
Being at Avery is like, one, it has taught me a lot about basically the culture here at the College of Charleston, for one. But also like I really enjoy working with the people here, and I really enjoy like getting to meet other people. Like you see the paintings around in the building, and I just like enjoy like learning and seeing other things that I don't get to see on campus or hear about. Campus is basically majority white, so I'm like, when I tell some of my friends, I'm like, come to the Avery, you know, come to the Avery. Like, you don't see a lot of students as much as I feel like they should come to the Avery. And so, you know, I want to try to get more students, more people involved on campus and, you know, just look around, whatever it is they need. Like, it's a community, like you told me, it's a community. And when I first came here, I told Darren, I was like, I'm looking for a community. I'm looking for like, almost feel like a family here, and which is hard when, you know, the school is a PWI majority. You know, I have no problem with that, but because obviously I chose the college because I like it for a reason, but you know, I enjoy having this space and I feel safe. I feel like I can be heard. No.
They asked it. So the question on the floor was, did Patricia come from a predominantly white high school?
But I've been to private schools, Christian private schools, well, yeah, where it's been predominantly white. And I'm not gonna say like the curriculum it's good, but it just wasn't the best experiences I've had personally. So the school nice overall. I'm not gonna.
So,
Yeah.
so I'm going to toss out a question that Patricia had originally crafted, and I think it'll bring us into a conversation about the book, even if we haven't read it. One of the questions was, what comes to mind when you think of Charleston, right? What sites come to mind when you think of Charleston? So we had talked about how many people know of Avery or don't know of Avery. And of those sites, which ones do you think do a good job, you know, in quotes, which does a pretty good job of like talking about the history of the city, but also includes African Americans? Can we hear you? Okay.
I think that's a wonderful question. So I'm Erica Veal. I'm the research archivist and interpretation coordinator at Avery. And just to back up for a second, I was also a history major at Columbia College. And I think I only thought about being a social studies teacher or being a college professor and I applied to the College of Charleston, and I got placed at the Avery Research Center as a graduate assistant. Didn't know what Avery was, and that opened me up into a whole world of historical interpretation, museum studies, and all these other things. And then my first full-time job after leaving the Avery was a historical interpreter for the Charleston County Parks. So that experience led me to being able to visit a lot of historic sites around Charleston County. So especially when Charleston County Parks acquired McLeod Plantation, I was still the historical interpreter for a little while during that transition. And so I was looking at other sites to kind of get a feel for how we would eventually interpret at McLeod. And so I got to visit places like Middleton Place. That's a place that I tend to recommend. I think they do a great job of interpreting the African experience in the Low Country, in the Charleston area. They have shortcomings like any place. They don't talk about Gullah Geechee at all in their interpretation. They don't mention the name Gullah Geechee, the word Gullah Geechee. And I asked the interpreter, they only have one Black interpreter. So, it's important for us to be able to tell our own stories. And there's only one Black interpreter at Middleton Place, which is thousands of people probably each month. And although they do a good job, they don't mention Gullah Geechee, which to me is a disservice because they tend to focus more on the Barbados connection. So that's one thing that they do there. Obviously, McLeod Plantation does a great job. And the Avery Research Center, those would probably be my top three places that I visited that I recommend people to visit. And maybe the Old Slave Mart Museum. So I was working as a graduate assistant when that opened, and my supervisor at the time, Georgette Mayo, said that I had to go there and review their exhibits, and I did that. So I haven't been back since, but I've heard wonderful things about their interpretation. So I think it's only gotten better since it opened over 15 years ago. Aside from the illustrious Avery Center, I have not been to as many historical sites here in Charleston as I would have liked. For Georgia, also a part of the Gullah Geechee Cultural Corridor. I have been to Halford Bradford Plantation in Georgia. And me and my family went. I was very, very upset at the curation of what was said and what was done. And also, we were the only Black people there. I thought it was interesting that they didn't even mention the slave quarters at the end. I was like, hello, we would have wanted to know that. And how me and my family kind of, everybody else trailed on off, went to buy their gifts, kept it moving, but we kind of stayed and, paid reverence. That was important. Well, I have been to a place in Charleston. I take that back. The College of Charleston, Stono Preserve, AKA Dixie Plantation. That was my introduction to the college. I had a department picnic there. And yeah, that's a whole piece of land that the university has that is, they don't want to call it that, but it is that. So I have been somewhere. And then we got the museum opening in January, right? So I imagine that will be a space to do that as well at the international level. Mm-hmm. I forgot to mention Kaw Interpretive Center. They do a great job, and I definitely send folks there. Was places that we were disappointed in their interpretation a part of that?
Yes.
I don't want to say.
Well, you don't have to say. You can just say what they lacked.
I will say that there's one particular historic plantation that developed an African American exhibit. They came to the Avery to work on that exhibit. This was when I was a grad student, so 15 years ago. And I remember Miss Mayo working hard with the person that came to help them develop that exhibit. And when it came out, it was terrible. I was tasked with reviewing that exhibit as well. It was terrible. They had several slave cabins where they created exhibits inside of, and it was very bad. But they make their money off of festivals, not off of historical interpretation. So it was definitely an afterthought. And thanks for all that help, but we're just going to throw this together.
Go ahead. We don't have to say names. Like I said, we're on YouTube. So, you know, if you want to just, yeah, I just listened to a podcast and they've said, tell a story, but I ain't saying no names, right? So it's like, you could tell us, you know, what are things that you felt and it gives us a better understanding of like, where are we lacking in the historical interpretation and storytelling around the city or other places. But yes, it's right.
Yeah, I must say, I have lived in Charleston since 1974. I have not been to any plantation for a tour. I've gone for weddings at Middleton. I've gone to Middleton with Color of Music. I've never been to McLeod. I've not been anywhere. Did not go to the slave market. My sister coming here wants to know, where's the slave? I said, I have no idea. And you know, why have I not developed an interest? I don't know. I live on a plantation, read about it after I moved there, but then took an interest in it and just read more about the plantation. And it has an interesting story to tell.
One of the things that I found that I needed to understand better when I first came here was the issue around monuments. And with the most, you know, in some ways the most predominant was the John C. Calhoun Monument at Marion Square. And so this is again part of my lack of education and really understanding when those monuments were put up and what they really represented and how some individuals interpret those as this is our history. You know, you probably all are familiar with I won't go into the arguments, but I remember reading some things about individuals in Charleston at least trying to say, okay, if you're not willing to take it down, why not at least put something there to put it into historical context and explain who John C. Calhoun was and some of the other aspects of his life rather than vice president, et cetera. And I found that, you know, it's very interesting. And I learned much more about the monuments around the country that were really put up during Jim Crow and what they represented. And it seemed to me fair that if you're going to have something like that, you put up the counter discussion. Now, as it turns out, it ended up getting taken down, which, okay, but I just found the whole monuments and not doing a good job in giving both sides of their purpose to be not done very well, let's say.
Let me go back to the original question Dr. Butler asked about Charleston and what you think of, in relation to this book, just Charleston is a microcosm, right, of the story of this country and all the untold histories that are here but not here. You know, they're not fully realized or spoken or told. And you know, this place, I think of churches as the holy city. You know, we have this presence of churches, and the Black churches know so much truth. And that is known within the congregations of those churches and the history of those churches. And I think my train of thought went here because you're mentioning, you know, the statue that needed to be taken down, but there's fortunately now a statue toward Denmark Vesey. But I mean, still people don't know who he is, and he's a hero of this place. And I mean, the truth is being told a little bit now, but it's still under celebrated. But there is such a rich network here of the ability to tell the story because of the Avery and the, you know, congregations of people that know. And I just sometimes wish that there was a funding to have all these people write their stories that have lived here in this place that was like central to the whole start of the story with this country. Anyway.
Yeah, following that, the question, the original question. So we talked about the city of Charleston, but what do you think that the College of Charleston can do to tell more complete stories of slavery and, since the building's been here since 1770. So, and, mhm.
What can the college do? The college can continue to support the research center and to recognize its value. I mean, there was a reception here a couple of months ago where they brought in the Alumni Association, a couple of other organizations. So maybe having more faculty come into this facility. Because I agree, people don't know that the Avery Research Center is here.
They know we here sometimes. Yeah. We have a musical mic going around back there.
I'd actually, Patricia, I would actually be kind of be curious to hear what, from your perspective, what nudged you towards getting engaged with the Avery, and just thinking from the student's vantage point, what are some ways that we as a college community can kind of nudge students to have what are at times these uncomfortable conversations? And we talked earlier, right, about how previously this book was required. This past year was the first year it was optional. I think the percentages that I heard were about 50% of incoming students picked the book up. So that's about half, and who knows how many of those actually read it. So that's a significant, gap, a missed opportunity, so to speak. So, is it baking in requirements into the curriculum? Is it requiring engagement in student programming? I'm curious, just I guess from the student's vantage point, what are ways that we can just nudge folks to get over those initial barriers and engage more with this history that is all around us?
Personally, I can only speak. When you're like doing a bunch of schoolwork and there's, I didn't even know about the building of Avery. I heard from my sister who knew Darren. So I was like, what is the Avery? I think the college, I don't want to say they're doing a bad job. They're not, but I feel like they could. No, like you said, more requirements, maybe. I don't want to be like, oh, you gotta go here. Like you don't, but I feel like if they did like include more like requirements within different programs, like, oh, show them around, oh, hey, we have the Avery Research Building. And of course their question is gonna be like, what is the Avery? So I think as a student, first thing I'm gonna look is at Oaks, which is like, oh, where all of our assignments are. I'm like, oh, and we're all on social media and we're all keeping track of that. So I feel like if the College of Charleston, if their page, it's not just, oh, here, come to the Avery for this informative, we're more than that. We're more than just people coming to talk here. Like we have art in here. You can, conduct your own little research. You can ask questions. So I feel like that's what the college can do. But also, as a student, like since I work here, but also I want to promote the Avery. So, thank you for asking that question.
So I think it would be great if the college, first of all, just thinking based on what Patricia said, I would love to see like the campus tours for prospective students, maybe even start at Avery and then walk to other parts of the campus. Because I feel like I've seen a lot that start at Addlestone. So And that could be asking a lot for a lot of folks that walk, especially in the summertime when a lot of that stuff is happening. But even if we had a little 15 passenger van when folks came down, there's no reason why I feel like every incoming student or even potential prospective student tours couldn't come through Avery, even if they just did a quick self-guided, or because they definitely need to step inside the building, even if it's only on the first floor and back out. So I would love to see that. But also, this is one of the #1 tourist destinations in the world. Super rich history for African Americans and the entire nation. So we should definitely have like a robust interpretation kind of like program where we're certifying historical interpreters and recruiting at the high school level folks that could be giving tours, not just about African American history and colonial history and Charleston history, but like Indigenous Americans have a very rich history in the Low Country, and many communities are still thriving today that are, continuing to promote that history and connecting with some of those communities to tell that story, because I don't know any site that really touches on that besides maybe Kaw Interpretive Center. So yeah, that would be great. I would love to see more certified interpreters, Black and Brown certified interpreters in the college, kind of really putting some support behind that initiative, and young folks especially.
Since you're talking about young folks, I think that, Charleston K through 12, like students and teachers should know that Avery exists. It's like such a piece of the history of education, that I don't know what the relationship is currently, but a piece of professional development should be for Charleston educators to know that this extensive resource exists that tells the full history. I don't know how to get that done, but I'm just gonna
toss something out there. I want to say thank you for this. I know people are like, this feels like an Avery infomercial. It is not. These are not paid spokespersons. But instead, what I'm hoping that it brings attention to is something that's really key on the college, but also on the city and other levels, is the idea of context. Because I can't remember who just said that about the statues having context, the monuments and memorials having context. And so in the book, and specifically, there's a scene where they're at one of the cemeteries. It's a cemetery for Confederate soldiers, and they're inside this church that's been repurposed. And one of the things was that the tour guide, or the woman who's kind of managing the space, says, if we could just you could just take Civil War completely out of this, right, and just admire the building for its beauty, right? And I'm sitting here and I'm just like thinking about how often places in Charleston have that same experience, right? Where people come into Avery and they're like, this is such a beautiful building. I'm like, let's talk about the context, right, under which it was built. Let's talk about the college and why Avery is here, right, rather than in the middle of a campus that's, almost 100 years older than this building. And so one of the things that I will constantly ask is, what might be lost? What's at stake when we teach about a city, when we teach about a place, when we teach about a people without historical context? And I don't know if that feels rhetorical or not, but I think that so much of Charleston is often taught without historical context. African Americans are often I think Gullah Geechee culture also gets talked about without historical context. Thinking about this idea of how can we start to have what do we need to do to help people understand.
Do we know, does the city still require, there used to be a test you had to take to become a certified tour guide. And I think became optional at some point. But you brought up a great point that this is a tourist destination. You have millions and millions of visitors coming through each year. And the historical narrative that is shared with them has traditionally been very curated, right? And so that is a potential outlet, right? Where you could help to contextualize the narrative that is being shared with visitors. And I don't know what goes into who creates the certification process, who they are conferring with, what the steps would be to maybe help enhance that training process. But just using that as an example, I mean, gosh, that historical narrative that is shared with visitors is a prime opportunity to provide some more of that context. And then hopefully those folks take that narrative home with them and the message spreads a little bit. So I don't know, do others know?
Believe that I know. So I want to say in 2019, that tour guide test was deemed unconstitutional and it was no longer a requirement. So it was a huge barrier for a lot of people who wanted to deliver tours. It was very intimidating. We actually have it in the reading room downstairs. And so as a certified interpreter, one of the things that you'll learn going through the certification process is you have to know your resource. That requires dedication to research and lifelong learning, but then you let the facts speak for themselves. It's not about curating, it's just about, your interpretation of the facts, letting them speak for themselves and you interpreting it based on your personal experience and sharing your stories. So as far as I know, it's still no longer a requirement, which I think is a good thing personally.
Last night I was at a historic foundation with partnering with Explore Charleston and the city of Charleston at a tourism forum at the visitor center. And they spent time on a variety of different issues with tourism, but one of them was the walking tours and that whole issue. And there was a lawsuit and the city lost. And so now they're trying to figure out how to regulate it. But I can tell you from just listening to them, their focus was on the numbers of people and how they behave walking through the streets and not necessarily, the content is important to them, but it was interesting what they talked about last night was, well, maybe we shouldn't have the max 20, maybe we should have only 15 because they can't get by the sidewalks and all that. So they're kind of, I'm probably not being fair to them, but that was what they talked about last night, as opposed to, we really need to do something more with how we train our tour guides and what they talk about.
Regardless of passing that test, which I did pass, the content of any tour is never policed. You pass the test, you can say whatever you like. It doesn't matter. It was not policed, is not policed. So the most popular tour in Charleston today are ghost tours. Okay, I rest my case. But facts are few and far between. You two? Oh, okay. Yeah. So the point is that might not be a helpful way, and walking tours can't come down here away from the primary source of the historical district. How many people in this room know what those two gold dots are on the wall? Gold dot.
You got gold dots.
See, there's a gold dot over there. There's a gold dot over there. Those are finger marks in the bricks made by the babies who helped make the bricks that built this city.
Mic drop. All right. So actually we are, we have like 2 minutes left. I tried to extend it since we had a little bit of technical difficulties, but I want to do two things. I want to thank you all for tuning in and dealing with us on YouTube. I want to thank the individuals who are here in the room
And I also want us to think about all the different contributions to this conversation. My hope is that we grow these kinds of conversations. So in the room, we have undergraduate students, faculty, community members, staff, people who are just genuinely concerned. We're missing a demographic. We're missing people under the age of 18 at the table. But I think if we're going to tell the story of Charleston and interpret and do more, then we're going to need all generations represented, all walks of life represented to kind of have this conversation. And so my hope is that one other thing, I don't know, we can make that required, but I think it's really interesting that Clint Smith did not choose Charleston, but it makes room for us to think about what would have been the site in Charleston that he would have chose to have this conversation about how do you tell a story and how do you tell stories about slavery, right? The chapter, if I answered the question, the chapter that compelled me was the chapter on Angola, the Angola prison in Louisiana. Putting it right next to the Whitney chapter was interesting to me. But what would be the site in Charleston? And I hope that we continue this because this is also for tourists. So when we visit other cities that are not home, where do we go to find out the answers to the histories, to our questions, right? Where do we go? And do we hold that same kind of candle, that same kind of criticality to the tour guides and interpreters of those spaces? And I'm hoping that that's the kind of tourist and visitor that we will have here in Charleston. So yes, I think it's important that people go and take tours for entertainment purposes and hopefully learn something along the way. But when you visit, whether it be Tennessee, Texas, Missouri, New York, who are you relying on to tell you the stories? And are you asking the questions? So in the Angola chapter in particular, I thought it was interesting that there's a jump from indigenous communities to the purchase of the land that Angola is built on, the prison, but there's no mention of slavery in between, right? So for us, I offer another thing I want to offer is Avery as a resource. So in 2023, Erica Veal, who is a certified interpretive guide and specialist, trainer, and not just certified by us, because we don't have that kind of certification, but by a national organization. And so my hope is that you will join us in having these conversations, right? Knock on our door. We want you to talk about this book with your friends and your family, but we also want you to get involved. So we are the best equipped to be storytellers. We have people here in the city who are trained and who work with history every day. The part that Patricia didn't mention, but I think is also important, is Avery is living history. So there have been days that I've walked in here and graduates of Avery Normal Institute drop in and point out different parts of the building that was like, this was a classroom. I remember when the kindergartners were over there. And I remember so just understanding that Charleston is always living, breathing history. And Avery is one of those places that you can actually make that a starting point. And we ask that you show up here with a critical eye. And so the part that I love about the text is where character are you going to be, right? Are you going to be the interpreter that actually has done the work and wants to tell the story and stories and let the facts speak for themselves, right? And won't gloss over anybody? Do you want to be the visitor that asks questions, that asks the interpreter to dig or have the interpreter point you in the right direction? Or are you going to be the person who stands by and was like, man, I can't believe you just took the gloss, right? That you just took the shine, off of Jefferson for me, right? And you just walk away disappointed. You took the shine off of Calhoun for me, right? So I just want people to think about how can we use this book to inspire ourselves and one another to really get involved in telling stories, not only about where we are, but also the places that we visit. So I want to say thank you to Patricia for taking me up on my challenge. I want to thank you all for joining us this evening, and we look forward to seeing you in the building and around the building. Have a good evening.
Just hold it. Make sure the light goes off.
Oh, stop. Yes.